It's 5:45, and here we are live on Channel 17. I'm Lauren Glendavidian, and I'm very pleased this evening to be with the Executive Director, Sarah Lee, of the Governor's Commission on Women. Women, gotta get that right. When you're with the Mayor of Burlington, you get that wrong sometimes. And Susan Allen, who's a legal research coordinator.
Right.
Got it. Of the Governor's Commission on Women, and we're really glad to have you here. And the reason that I called you up to ask you to be on was my attention was struck by this book that you're working on. But before we even get into that, let's talk about what the Governor's Commission does, because you're one of those sort of quasi-departments that no one's really ever sure what exactly you do, and I think you're actually pretty busy and doing quite a bit. So I think our viewers want to know. Sarah.
Well, we are very busy. There are many things actually that we do. We work on legislative issues for women. For example, we really worked very hard to get a mammogram bill passed through the legislature during the last session, insurance coverage for mammograms. So legislative issues are our big area. Another area that we do is we are the grants administrators for all the domestic violence and sexual assault programs statewide. So any federal and state funds come through our office and they get dispersed to the programs, the local program here being Women Helping Battered Women. And we also are very interested in appointments, getting more women on boards and commissions. That's a big part of what we do. And we also take crisis calls in the office and information calls. I think we documented that we had 1,000 of them last year. By that I mean everything ranges from suicide calls, which we've had, a woman who was just so upset because she was being in the middle of divorce and losing her farm, all the way to research calls. I'd like some information. I'm writing a paper on whatever issue, and I'd like some help on that. So we do everything basically at the office. 862-3966 is our number here at Channel 17 if you've got a call for Sarah or Susan about the Governor's Commission on Women. Let's talk about your legislative initiatives and the kind of work you're doing. I was extremely surprised to find out that insurance companies don't cover mammograms. Well, actually, that was the response that we got. I mean, I went over, when I got the bill together and I was getting a sponsor list, and I brought it over to a group of legislators that were sitting in the State House cafeteria, and I said, would you be willing to sign on it? And their look was just like that. You mean you don't already have that? And I said, no, oh no, we don't. Oh yeah, there was quite a bit of popular response. And the important thing too was that mammograms are such important ways to detect early breast cancer. I mean, they can detect something that a woman might feel, 2 years before that it's there, and at a stage where you can get early treatment, and or the cure rate, so that it saves misery, it saves money, and it makes perfect, good social policy. Why was it not part of the policy of insurance companies? And maybe in answering that question, you can speak to. Well, let's answer that one, and then we can talk about health care for women as an issue in the state that is gaining more and more currency as a political issue. I mean, everyone else knew it, but now the political leaders are kind of catching on. But how did you see, in your experience in getting this piece of legislation through last year, how do insurance companies not meet the needs of women? I mean, is this just one example of many things, or are they for the most part pretty comprehensive in their attention to women's health needs?
No, I wouldn't say so.
No, they're not.
Go ahead. Mammogram was Sarah's baby, so I'll let you.
Well, the fact is that insurance companies don't like mandates, period. Anything that the government says that you ought to cover, they have sort of tend to have a knee-jerk reaction that they don't want to cover it. It's just don't interfere in what we're doing. But I think if you look at some of the procedures that they choose to cover without making a big deal of it, you wonder, well, is this another reason why only 13% of women actually were involved in any testing? The testing that's done is testing always on men. And just recently they had actually in Washington, they have a women's health bureau now.
to do some research for health on women, because everything was done on men before. I think it was just, taking care. Men are mostly in the positions of decision making, and it was like, overlooked.
Susan, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I would just add that, it's one more way that insurance companies see their costs going up. Because if they have to provide any sort of service for another citizen, i.e. a woman, then they see it as making their costs go up. And
isn't that kind of funny?
No, it doesn't.
Right.
In the long run, it's very cost saving to do this, because it costs a tremendous amount of money, to treat women in the advanced stages of breast cancer. Mm-hmm. So it not only saves money, but I think there would have been a bigger fight had it cost more, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. I think that even they realized that it was probably a good thing to do, but I think that they don't like to be told this. You will give coverage for this. There's just a real. This is in general with business not wanting government encroachment.
And also, traditionally, insurance companies have provided coverage for boys and men over women, girls and women. You can see that example in sports. There's a lot of coverage that's offered in sports for boys that you wouldn't find for girls. There's a lot of injuries that boys get that we're paying for, because the costs are spread out to all the insurees, I guess.
But they're not covered in the case of young girls?
Well, there are a lot of injuries, sports injuries that boys get that obviously girls don't get. Right. And sports have historically been, dominated in the arena by boys. When you're talking about football and soccer, and a lot of those things have opened up to girls now, but historically it's been mostly boys actively involved in all those sports, and we've been paying for it for years.
And when we were talking also about the health research, mostly men are the ones who are in the research on heart attacks. But what's recently come out is that women, this is a silent killer of women. Heart disease is the second biggest killer for women. And what's happening is that most women, when they do have heart attacks or heart problems, they don't get the triple bypass surgery. They don't get the stress tests. They don't get the let's check your cholesterol and on all that thing, because they haven't done the studies on them. The women were not thought to be high risk for heart disease. And actually, they've come to find out that they really are, and that often it's found much later down the road, and that they don't do well, that they die more, and they don't have the kind of surgery because it's too late for the surgery. It's too late for that kind of triple bypass and so forth.
So are you saying that these things aren't covered insurance-wise, or are you saying it's a practice of the medical system not to look for these things in women?
Very often what has happened is that the medical research has been done on men, and that there has not been much emphasis on women and women's health problems. So that breast cancer is an epidemic in this country. And, it's kind of pathetic in a way that we had to fight for a bill for mammograms, for coverage, when Vermont is like the fourth highest state, fourth highest for breast cancer death in the country. And I think it was Pat Schroeder who had the bill in Congress. And she's a representative from Colorado, and she has been pushing quite a bit for more emphasis on women's health problems. And I think we're going to see that now. That we have this women's health center that I mentioned for research is now there's a woman in that position, and I think we're going to see a little bit more shift toward research for women, more emphasis on what women's health problems are.
862-3966. We're here at Channel 17 Live with Sarah Lee and Susan Allen of the Governor's Commission on Women. I'm going to ask you a sort of big, loaded question. A lot of people think that there might not be a need or a purpose for a Governor's Commission on Women, and that women are sort of whiny, and that we don't have special needs or considerations. What's your response to that?
Have you got an hour? Well, I have a little sheet that we usually bring and we hand out to people, and it's called Women's Gap Sheet. And it lists 10 different areas in the way women still have a gap. And the title of it is, if you think that there's still no need for a women's movement, consider these facts. And it goes all the way down the line. Women are paying $20,000 more on average for health, for their life insurance and for their coverage of insurance in general than men are. Women still make 65 cents to the dollar on your average annual salary that men make. And that in the last 30 years, there's been almost no progress in that area.
Maybe 2 cents.
Women are 83% of the custodial parents, and yet they only get 50% of the child support payments that are ordered by the court. So they actually get. I'm not even talking about where there's no court orders. So and you look at the feminization of poverty. 75% of the people who are in poverty now are women and children. So you just keep going down the line. There's displaced homemakers. It's a large group of women whose husbands have died. They're in middle age, maybe in their 50s and so on. They're in worse condition actually than the single parent homemakers who are qualified for welfare. So the problems really are immense, and just the health problems that I just talked with you before. There really is a need out there for women, for women advocating for women's issues. And there was a poll. They had New York Times did a poll about a year and a half ago. There was a big article in the news: is the women's movement dead? Do we need a women's movement? Hasn't everyone arrived? So they did this poll, and the poll showed that 67% of the women, cross-section, nationwide, all ages, all economic backgrounds, said yes, that there is a need for a women's movement, and they want women to advocate for their issues.
The issues that you're talking about are based on an economic order.
That's right. Many of them are.
Where women do not have the economic power, and hence political power, and hence the other elements of power that men have in the United States. Would you advocate that the economic order be overturned in some way, or how would you redress these what appear to be fundamental differences?
The problem is with the glass ceiling. I mean, when you have women only in 3% of the decision-making, your board of directors is where it's at for the top corporations, and of the Fortune 500, only 3% of the women of the Fortune 500 board of directors are women. So that's the people. You have to have women in key policy-making issues and arenas, so that would be the beginning of parity.
And I'd also like to add that, I would like to see some change in the policy, and the way society approaches and balances what a woman makes in a job that is just as responsible and just as important compared to what a man makes in a similarly responsible job. For example, and I had this discussion recently with you, let's say a male plumber can make, $40 an hour fixing your pipes. Well, a nurse who's over the emergency table with someone may make only $12 an hour. And society has said, oh, that's okay. That's all she deserves. But meanwhile, the men are making a lot more at the same type of responsible positions. And I think that's something that society really has to take a close look at.
I wonder if our viewers have an opinion on this, if they think there's a need for a women's movement. 862-3966. Do not hesitate to call us. People of all persuasions and opinions, we love to hear your point of view, so don't hesitate to call us. Now, you've been working on a revised version of a book that the Governor's Commission has published. Susan, tell us what it is, and tell us what you're discovering as you work on it, and what the gist of the book is.
Well, it's a handbook for women all across the United States, all across the state of Vermont. It's supposed to provide them with information, legal information about their rights and resources for them so that they will feel more empowered. The more knowledge they have about what their legal rights are and what the law is and how it applies to them, the more powerful they're going to feel. And the book was written so that the layperson can understand it, can grasp what's going on in it. It's not written specifically for attorneys. It's written so that a woman can pick it up. She'll see the legal language, the legal expressions, but she'll also see what they mean so that she can communicate with the legal community, with judges and lawyers, if she ever needs to. And it also provides enough information, further information, so that if she feels that she wants to delve further into it, she can also do some research on her own.
What are some of the issues that women have to deal with in the legal community that you touch on? I mean, I think very few, I mean, growing up, I just would add this, growing up, we aren't trained to expect that we have to deal with the legal system in any way. I mean, we don't have any of those tools. It comes up quite a lot in a number of different forms. What are some of the issues that you touch on that women have to really be prepared to address?
Well, there are a lot of major issues. One everybody's familiar with are employment rights and sexual harassment in the workplace. That's still going on. And this book will spell out what a woman can expect, what her rights are, what she does not have to put up with, and how to take care of that situation. Employment right discrimination.
The child support. There's
a whole section on divorce. To let a woman know what to expect when she has to go through a divorce or when she anticipates going through a divorce. Child support collection, visitation, child snatching. There's a whole section on divorce and related subjects to that. Marital property rights, wills and probate, for people who don't know anything about making a will and the importance of knowing what you're doing when you're making a will. Financial matters, credit, insurance. We've even thrown in some real important chapters this year that are different. It is revised this year, and it is a little different than it has been in the past. We've dedicated a separate chapter to substance abuse this year and its effects on women. We have a chapter on violence against women and the new laws that have been implemented to protect women in this state.
What are those laws?
Well, one of the reasons that we knew that we had to do the book again, because it's really totally changed from 1985, which was the last edition. In 1990, legislative session was really a wonderful session for women. We had enforcement of child support orders. Now you can go and get your child support through wage withholding, and there's a whole chapter on telling people how to do that. There was stronger laws related to sexual assault, so that in certain instances bail could be revoked where you have violence and sexual assault. You have changes in the domestic violence laws now that it's a crime if you violate an abuse prevention order, which it wasn't before.
The second time you violate it, yes. It's a felony.
Yes.
It's a felony now.
But it's a misdemeanor the first time.
First time it's a misdemeanor, second time it's a felony.
Right, yeah. So there's some strengthening of the laws for that.
Right.
There's some, also, what you did, Susan, is a whole chapter on child care resources. The earlier section didn't have any kind of information on child care, and it really is very helpful to people. So it's a resource book in addition to legal rights. But the other laws of establishment of family courts, there was no family courts before the 1990 legislative session. So, you know, it's a kind of thing, a handbook for people, and we want to have it everywhere. It's going to be in the family courts. It's going to be in the social service agencies. It's going to be in the Department of Employment and Training offices, in the battered women's centers. Everywhere you go, we want this to be available to people. It'll be free. And we're planning 25,000 copies to be distributed. So, and anybody who wants to help us with a volunteer effort, give us a call.
What do you need volunteers to do?
Well, if you're a volunteer and you're head of an organization, let's say whatever, you know, organization, community action organization, and you're in Burlington, you call us and say, we'd like to distribute the books. We want to have them in our place. So what we'll be doing is setting up a volunteer network and getting copies out to people.
The one thing, there was a second part to your question. Was there anything that I discovered that about while I was writing the book, and I should say editing it, but The one thing I did discover was it's not big enough. I'd like to make it a lot bigger. There's so much out there that women need to know, and it's not easily accessible for them. And this will be. It's free, it'll be available, and it'll be something that they can just leaf through if they, if they want to, chapter per chapter, or they can read it cover to cover.
Okay. I'm just asking that to open the window because it is getting a little hot. Here we are. 862-3966 is our number here at Channel 17 if you'd like to give us a call. Now let's talk a little bit about your work at the Governor's Commission on Women and getting women on commissions and boards. How do you do that in Vermont? How do you sort of target that and figure out how to do it and cultivate that?
Well, we have an appointments committee that's been a standing appointments committee for quite a while. You see, I should say that there are commissioners. There are 16 commissioners that are chosen by the governor, and they are our sort of board of directors. And I'm the executive director. We're the staff, and we work out of the Montpelier office.
And what's your budget?
Oh, it's totally for staff and for operating. It's $122,000. That's it for all of us for this year. But we have $500,000 in grants that we disperse to all over the state to the domestic violence and sexual assault programs. But that's money that comes in and goes out. We don't take any of that.
Okay, so you have a board, 16
Yes,
commissioners.
16 commissioners.
From all over the state?
Yes, they're from all over the state.
Who are some of the commissioners we might know here in Chittenden County?
Maybe you know Sandy Dooley. She lives here in Burlington. Ann Pugh also, I think, is with UVM.
Right.
Yeah, she's with UVM. Kate Baldwin works also with UVM in the Public Relations Office. She's a new commissioner that was just recently appointed by by our former governor, Governor Snelling. And are there any other Burlington people? It seems as though leaving any out. Oh, Pat Heffernan. Pat Heffernan from Sandage Advertising has been a long-time commissioner and a wonderful supporter of the commission. So we have a lot of good people that work with us. Sandy is our legislative chair, Sandy Dooley, and we have a legislative committee that meets, and we look over the bills, and we generate bills, and we vote up or down whether the commission will endorse a bill, and that kind of gives us our go-ahead what we do up on the State House. And the appointments committee that you asked, I have to get back to that question. There is a chair of the appointments committee, and Ann Pugh was the chair, but she's not going to do that now anymore. We're going to have a new chair. But we have talent bank forms, and we'd like people to call the office, and that's 828-2851, if they would like a talent bank form, because what we do with the talent bank form is we pass that on to the appointments committee, and they make the recommendations to Governor Dean, and then Governor Dean wants to have a list, because they're always asked now, how many women are on your boards and commissions? And so what we do is we furnish him with qualified people who are interested in the boards and some areas where he can make some appointments.
Susan, were you going to add something?
No, she basically said it all.
Does it make a difference to have a woman governor as opposed to a male governor, have you found, in the work of the commission in terms of moving your agenda forward?
I think it's helpful to have a woman, but I don't think a woman is necessarily a feminist, and I don't think a man is necessarily not a feminist. I know that I've worked with Howard in the past 2 years with our present Governor, Howard Dean, and he was a wonderful help, for example, in the mammogram bill, and that he's been extremely supportive of the commission and of women's issues. So, I mean, I think that we're really very lucky to have, there are several people. In fact, Doug Racine, who's the senator from Chittenden, is a wonderful supporter of the commission, and so we've been lucky to have some really good men legislators and governors to work with.
What about the legislature? One of the things we noticed actually I think it was Tim Lewis's retrospective on Governor Snelling, there was a pan of the legislative chambers from when Governor Snelling was governor in the first few terms. It was all men. I mean, there was maybe 1 or 2 women. And now the complexion has changed somewhat. Are you satisfied with the number of women who are in the legislature?
No. We'll never be
guess that was
satisfied
an
until
easy
it's
question.
50-50.
Okay.
That was an easy answer.
Okay.
The fact is that it's about 33% now of women, and we're one of the highest. We used to be the second highest in the country. We've moved down to about the fourth in the country. But then you have to look at how much money do you actually make in the state legislature. So you take a look, and I'm talking money again because that's one of my favorite topics. You start to look at what people make for salaries and whether it's a part or a full-time legislature. And the part-time legislatures with the very low salaries, you have a higher number of representation of women. The places like New York, where it's big bucks, full-time job, you're not going to get many women. Women have a very difficult time being candidates, getting money. That's the biggest thing. Having the networks going and being able to get out there. First of all, there's always the child care issue, too. I ran myself in 1986, and my little girl, you know, she was in kindergarten at the time, and the first picture that she did for kindergarten showed a picture of her mother, and it says underneath, "Mother's handing out little newspapers." That was when I was doing campaign brochures. So, you know, it's difficult for women.
Channel 17, you're on the air.
Yes, I have a question about the family leave law.
Okay, thank you.
Critics believe that it's going to be burdensome for business. I was wondering if maybe the Commission could comment on that.
Good question.
Well, I can comment. There have been surveys that have been done nationally, and there are surveys that have been done in this state. And the business community, their biggest complaint about the burden is the unemployment tax.
Oh, go ahead. She's listening. She's out there.
The survey shows that there will be no burden on an employer in the state for unemployment tax. For one thing, the leave is unpaid. So the woman has to take off the number of weeks she's given without a salary unless she has any accumulated time for vacation or sick time, but that's it. And there aren't a whole lot of people out there that can take more than 12 weeks of work off unpaid.
It's unpaid leave, and it's also no benefits. So that there isn't, you know, that the employer doesn't have to pay benefits while the person is on leave. But there has been a study that was done this past summer by the Work and Families Institute, and what they did was they surveyed the businesses in the 4 states that have passed family leave laws, and they found 91% of the companies said it was no big deal to implement that family leave law, and then a very high percentage of it said that there was no increased cost involved. Now, the reason there's no increased cost involved is because for a lot of them, they hire either part-time workers, you know, temporary workers at a lower rate, or they don't hire somebody. It's a fill-in. You know, they have somebody else either fill in the position or whatever. So that it turned out that the actual cost of having people on on leave was less than the training costs of hiring and having somebody else come in and new and with all the training costs that are involved. So that's what that family, you know, and that's something that I know that, for example, there is a business group that it's called NEBISAR, the National Association for Businesses for Social Responsibility. Sandage Advertising, I just mentioned Pat Heffernan, and Ben & Jerry's and several other companies are getting behind the family leave bill because they feel that it's really important public policy to do that. And so I think that there are some businesses that, you know, are concerned about it, but there are some businesses that feel it's real important that we do this.
Susan, did you just want to add something there?
I was just going to add that the business community's, I think, biggest gripe is the same gripe you hear over and over and over for any social mandates, and that is that it's a mandate. But if they're not going to do it, I guess somebody has to do it, don't they?
Okay, well, with that, I'm going to thank you very much for being with us. That was a very quick half hour, wasn't it? It was.
I know, it flew by.
I just flew right by. I know. I want to thank our caller. That was a very good question. I'm going to let people know that next we have Jan Lascaris and Jane Watson, city councilors from Ward 5, talking about Hydro-Quebec and their view. And at 7, MCHV expansion plans. And at 8:30, the Colchester Select Board, which is great, exciting public hearing. And at 11, the Sculpture Symposium. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Lauren.
And tomorrow night, more on Hydro-Quebec, so stay tuned, and we'll see you later.